So he was basically carrying on a generational name. So in this video I'll just call him Samuel. His nickname in high school was J-Rock. Samuel was described as a joker, and he always wanted to make people laugh. He was always cracking jokes, and in fact he always just wanted to make people smile and make people happy. His sister said he was a sweetheart and cared about everyone. He was always willing to help anybody if he could, but underneath this happy-go-lucky exterior, Samuel had some internal struggles, and in 2010 he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. He was suffering quite badly from paranoia, delusions, and sometimes even hallucinations. Some of the things that would happen to him were he would think that all of the family photos in the house were staring at him, and so he would have to turn them over or take them off the walls. Sometimes he would even have to turn the TV off because he would feel like it was talking directly to him, and he was put on medication to try and manage these symptoms. It did work to a certain degree, although Samuel wouldn't always take his medication, and so sometimes these delusions and paranoia would come back intermittently. All of his family helped and supported him through this, especially his partner named Diane, who he actually ended up marrying. Now, Diane actually had a couple of kids to a previous relationship herself, and when she married Samuel, he took on Diane's 2 kids as his own, and he loved them. He was a father figure to them, a really good one, and that's so we had this happy little family. Everything was going quite well for him. His life, however, Samuel did not have the most legitimate job known to man, and he was a drug dealer, and it was very risky business. And in 2014 he was caught, and he was sentenced to 8 years for drug dealing, and he was due to serve this sentence in Fishkill Correctional Facility, which is basically a prison in New York. Due to his bipolar disorder, Samuel was even put in a special building in this prison that housed all the inmates that had different mental illnesses or disorders, or whatever, I suppose, just to keep them all in the same area to make it easier to monitor them and care for them. So Samuel went to Fishkill Correctional Facility. He settled in rather well, and he started serving this sentence. However, just a few months in, Samuel received the devastating news that his mother had passed away, and he hadn't even been able to say goodbye to her, and he really struggled to deal with this. He considered as acting out. This was the reportings of the staff. However, regardless, Samuel was still really struggling mentally, and the guards and the prison staff just turned a blind eye to his struggles. If anything, they actually started punishing him for it, and he was regularly beaten and abused by the prison staff. I don't believe that this was something that was particularly targeted at Samuel himself. I believe the guards and the staff basically did this to multiple inmates as a form of punishment. This seemed like a really unsuitable place for inmates to be, but on occasions he would stand up for himself and he would try and defend himself in front of these guards. They would just throw him in solitary confinement, which is an awful punishment at the best of times, but especially for someone like Samuel, because allegedly they would refuse him his bipolar medication when he was in solitary, which of course would bring back all his paranoia and delusions and even hallucinations. Now that he's in this tiny room on his own, he was really, really suffering, and he would try and tell the staff that he was struggling, but they would just ignore him time and time again, and so his mental health would just spiral. And then on April 21st, 2015, Samuel was struck with another one of his delusions, and this time he believed that he was being let out of prison. He thought that the same evening he was going to go home to his wife and to his kids, and he was going to see his sister, and at 8 p.m. that night he even started packing up his bags ready to leave. He was telling all his friends, all his inmate friends, that he was going home. He was even talking to guards about it, talking about when he leaves. He wasn't leaving because this was all a delusion, that he still had a good few years on his sentence, and no one had told him that he was leaving. That's how they knew that this was another one of his delusions, and he really did believe it. As he was packing his bags, inmate friends were watching him do this, and they really were getting concerned to the point where they actually grabbed him and took him to one of the correctional officers. And they were like, "Look, Samuel needs immediate medical attention. He's struggling here. Now, before we get further into this, I do have to let you know that the details of this case are rather vague and probably not in as much detail as, say, something happening outside of a prison. So, we have to bear things in mind here. The reason I say this is because inmates themselves weren't actually called for being witnesses. Their testimonies weren't taken into account, so everything you hear from now on is from people within the force, like guards and sergeants, or people that are part of the system basically, so just bear that in mind as you listen to the rest of the story. So it's actually believed that Samuel was fairly calm throughout this whole situation. Just remember, he was just having delusions and he thought he was going home. If anything, he was really happy and he was really calm, and he thought that he was going anger or anything, and it wasn't troublesome in any way. It was just kind of sad that he believed that he was going home, and people had to tell him that it wasn't going to happen. So yeah, basically reports say that he was very calm as if all of this was going on, but suddenly all of that changes as soon as one of the higher up officers gets involved. was over 6 foot tall. He was about 235 pounds, which is about 106 kilograms, and he was quite a big guy. He should have been able to defend himself, but remember, there is 20 men versus him, and they have him on the ground. He had no chance, really. Before long, Samuel fell unconscious, and he was just laying there, completely motionless. Police officers didn't slow down one bit. If anything, the attack only got worse from here, and now the prison guards started shouting racist slurs at him. They were kicking him in the head, and they were spitting on him. And just let me remind you that he's now unconscious. He's obviously not moving. As all of this is going on, other inmates are just throughout the prison hearing this. They're obviously getting curious, then coming out to see what's going on. And prison guards didn't like this, so they started snapping at these other inmates, threatening to get back in your cells, in the day room, or you'll be next. These other inmates witnessed these prison guards beating and torturing Samuel so badly that they started injuring themselves in the process. One of the guards was beating him so hard that he gave himself an asthma attack, and he was really out of breath. He winded himself and gave himself an asthma attack, so that he had to go and sit down. One of the other guards had to seek medical attention for a broken foot or a hand fracture, something of that kind, because he'd been beating Samuel so hard, and actually medical staff were called into this section of the hospital to come and deal with these prison guards. But they were conveniently kept away from Samuel, and like the other prison guards, allegedly formed like a bit of a barrier, so that the medical staff didn't see that Samuel needed help, and instead they just treated these two officers with the asthma attack and the other one with a fractured hand. They were put on stretchers and taken to the infirmary section of the prison to be treated. Meanwhile, Samuel is laid motionless, unconscious, pretty much dying on the floor, as the officers were being transported to the infirmary. Sergeant Garino was heard shouting at Samuel, who was on the ground, saying, "You want to put your hands on my staff?" Drag this, and then he used a racial slur to the stairs again. And let me remind you, he's unconscious, so he can't even hear any of this, and they're just all still shouting racist slurs at him and awful things when they know he can't even hear it. And by the way, all of this had actually been happening. There was actually a female officer that went into one of the back rooms, and she grabbed a sheet and she came in and covered over Samuel's body with it. And even the officers that aren't exactly joining in the attack, they knew that this was awful and this is brutal, and this man is being tortured, and they're trying to give him some sort of dignity. Yet they're not stopping the abuse, they're not stopping the torture, and they're seeing how bad this is getting, but all they're doing is covering his body with a sheet. This sheet motionless, blood all over him, and their idea was to put him in a wheelchair and wheel him back to his cell, where he could just recover on his own in there. But in fact, they started wheeling him away. They bound his arms and his legs together so that he would not run away. I mean, this guy was unconscious, so and he didn't even have the energy to run away anyway. Even if he wasn't, he couldn't even fight back. They began to push his wheelchair with his almost lifeless body in it, and as they did, the prison guards were forming a human wall kind of where like the other inmates were, so that they couldn't see what had happened to Samuel. So they wheeled him all the way to the infirmary section of the prison, where those other two prison guards were, and they called for him. They called an ambulance for him. So they basically told the ambulance operator that he was suffering from an overdose. I mean, he was beaten black and blue and he was bleeding all over his body. I don't know why they thought that saying he suffered an overdose was, an appropriate kind of lie for what, his physical state. But anyway, that's what they said. So, but anyway, this didn't even matter because as soon as the ambulance arrived, prison staff told them to take those two prison guards that injured themselves during the torturing. Samuel, they just said, take those, they need the help. So the ambulance transported the prison guards to hospital for treatment. Meanwhile, Samuel Harrell is literally just there dying in this wheelchair, and he needed urgent medical care, and they didn't want to give it him. Eventually, about 20 minutes later, they finally called for another ambulance that came and picked up Samuel. They came and picked him up and transported him to hospital, but he was unfortunately pronounced dead on arrival. Samuel's family were not informed of his passing at all that night, and in fact, the first thing they heard was the following morning at 7:30 in the morning. His sister received an anonymous phone call that turned out to be from one of the inmates. This inmate basically said to Samuel's sister that Sam got hit the night before and they took him and he hasn't been back and nobody's heard or seen from him. And that was pretty much all this guy said to Sam's sister, that he'd been beaten, they'd taken him away and no one had seen or heard from him. And so she's basically panicking now and has no idea what's going on. As finally later that morning, the prison staff themselves called her to inform her of her brother's passing. And I'm not sure what excuse they gave, I'm not sure what they said, or how they said he died. I don't even know if they tried to give an excuse, but when his body was sent to run autopsy, it was confirmed that the cause of death was a homicide, and that this wasn't an overdose. And in fact, his toxicology report came back completely clear, and there was not a single drug in the man's system. An overdose was completely out of the question, and he was murdered. So Sam's family started demanding answers from the prison staff. But, as I'm sure you can imagine, it was just so hard was